right, welcome to episode 233 of Rogue Startups. Craig, how are you this week?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I'm busy in a good way, mostly. It's like you hope that every hour you spend or every minute you spend is like productive, busy, and shit that only you can do. And I am definitely not there, but I'm working my way towards it more and more all the time. So I feel like as long as I'm making progress there, then it's a good thing.
Good.
How about yourself?
I am just back from a personal business retreat where I went and did some really good work. And I haven't been on one in a long time, and I am both sad that I have not done this more often and really thrilled that I got the opportunity to do it this time. And I have some really great stuff to talk about today.
That's awesome. So just like for some parameters, like how long were you gone? Where did you go? Kind of what was the setup of it?
Sure. So when you take a personal business retreat, you should definitely get away. It's really hard to do this stuff at home. In fact, when I was talking with my wife about it, she was like, you have to get away. Like, don't hang out here. You would be an idiot to hang out here. And I'm so glad that I did that. So I took like a week off from work, first of all, but I didn't use the entire week for the retreat. I just sort of used it as detox time from my freelancing job. And I was glad I did that. So in the middle of that, I went up in the afternoon. I went up to the mountains. I went up to a mountain town here, Breckenridge. And I stayed at a condo up there. And I was up there for 2 nights. So the first night I went up there, I just kind of, I drove up. I was listening to some podcasts on the way up. And I basically just used it as a chill, relax, kind of bring myself down kind of day. And then the next day is when I spent on the actual retreat stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm glad that I did it in this format here because I feel like, first of all, getting away from your home and your office and your normal way of thinking definitely makes it easier for you to think about stuff that's different and think about stuff that's deeper because you're away from distractions at that point. You're out of your element. So the normal routines, the normal rules don't really apply anymore. And then the second thing I did was I had a more or less no device rule all day. I didn't totally follow that because during breaks, I would just check my email to make sure that nothing was going sideways customer support wise with Recapture. And I did have a couple of customer things, but it wasn't like I wasn't on there all day. I wasn't checking my email all day, but I did go for like maybe a half an hour half an hour in the morning and a half an hour early afternoon on email just to make sure that the customers' requests were being handled in a timely manner. That was it. But the rest of the time, it was strictly no devices. I had my phone out, but I was mostly using that as a timer. And then I also was playing some music. So I brought along a little Bluetooth speaker, and I would sort of change up the music as the day went on. I had some classical playing in the morning, and then I had some Latin jazz in the afternoon, and then that kind of bugged me after a while, so I went back to the classical. But just stuff to, for me, like having some background music kind of quiets my mind a little bit because it can, like the noisy part of my mind can focus on the music, and then I can have a easier time concentrating. I found this when I was in college, that we would often just do our studying or reading or whatever and would put on some classical music, and it was much easier to do that during those times. So I leveraged that, and while I was doing this, I basically had laid out beforehand a schedule, and this is going to sound super anal, but for me it was actually really helpful. I think that, if I had gone up there with a unscheduled, okay, we're just going to think about the business kind of thing, I don't think that I would have been nearly as productive. So what I used is I had just finished the Traction book by Gino Wickman for the Entrepreneur's Operating System. And that basically was a whole series of exercises that I could go through and do for my business. So I went through the whole process that they describe in Traction. Well, with a little caveat there. I did as much of that as I felt really applied to me as a single founder. And there is definitely stuff in there that it gets harder to apply it because you're not on a team of like 5 executives or something like that, and you're supposed to be discussing these things and going in depth into them. So it was mostly me just brainstorming. But what I did is I broke it down. There's like 6 different areas that you're supposed to do. So there's core values, core focus, the 10-year target, marketing strategy, a 1-year plan, rocks, issues. And if you've read the Traction book, you know what those things are and what I'm talking about, and I can talk about them in a little more detail here in a minute. But what I did was I set a time limit on each of these things. I started off the retreat with a global highs and lows for 2019 and the year to date up to this point, just so I had something to reflect on, to sort of put my mind into the, what's working, what's not working, what do I really hate, what do I really like, what do I want more of, what do I want less of. So I spent about an hour thinking about that stuff, brainstorming. I did it for my personal life. I did it for my professional life. And then after that, I started doing the exercises for Traction. So I would have like an hour to do core values, and then I did like an hour on core focus, and then I took a break for lunch, and then it was like half an hour for the 10-year target, and then an hour for the marketing strategy, and then an hour for the 3-year picture, and an hour for the 1-year plan, and then half an hour for the rocks and half an hour for the issues. And that was like, if you add that all up with some breaks in there, because I was also doing like, I brought food with me, and I, kept it very low ceremony so that I would be like, okay, what's an easy thing to do for breakfast? What's an easy thing to do for lunch? And I wouldn't be taking a lot of time to prepare those meals or whatever, but I would actually go and, have a brief break in there and get that food and then move back into my focus. So I was more or less staying in the apartment or the condo, whatever, most of the day. I took a walk in the morning, I took a walk at lunch, and then I took a walk in the afternoon. So I was kind of, mixing it up with some exercise and getting out there and some extra thinking time, and just gave me some good time to kind of clear my head and write down a bunch of stuff. And I brought it all back and I shared it with my wife, and she's like, wow, you were really productive. This was really good. And I was like, yeah, it worked out really well. I'm very happy with how it turned out.
No, so, that sounds like a really good setup, man. I guess I've done like a founder retreat kind of 1.5 times. I did basically a day in Annecy, like in town earlier this year. Oh God, maybe it was late last year. But basically spent the whole day down there. Dropped the kids off at school, went down there and stayed until about dinner time. I took a day retreat on the end of a trip to London about 1.5 years ago. But the time I did the Traction stuff actually was on the airplane. So it was one of our trips back from here to the States, where like you can't do anything else. And so like I had my notebook and I had the Traction book, and I just worked through it like you're saying, because it's a lot of work.
It is. It's a ton of work.
If you're starting from scratch to one, like, and I think this is where a lot of this conversation will go, is like filter out the stuff that you're not interested in or doesn't apply to you or you don't think will be helpful for the type of businesses that we run and the scale of businesses we run. And then for the stuff that you do need to like address to actually do it. And like those two things are, yeah, they're 8 hours of work.
Yeah. And I thought, when I was reading the Traction book, it was obviously directed at people that are making like 7 to 8 to 9-figure businesses with a multi-person executive team. Gino Wickman's whole premise on there, that he's got he talks about bringing the team together and having these discussions. And then I don't know, did you also read Get a Grip, his follow on to that, which was like the whole fiction thing? I thought it was really good, a little bit contrived, but it did sort of put the whole thing into place. Like, what does this look like in action? And, it was still structured around that same notion of, here are 5 executive people in a company that's making, tens of millions of dollars a year, and how are they going to grow, and so on and so forth. And so, that mental mapping exercise of how do I take that large structure and bring it down to a small scale was something that I thought would be harder, but it turns out it wasn't. It really wasn't that bad. When you're doing things like the core values, the exercise of the core values is so incredibly valuable. And it doesn't really matter whether you're a 10-person company or a 1-person company. If you don't have, you should know what are the things that drive you in that business. And I brought, a little sheet with me up of a cheat sheet of a bunch of core values. And there's stuff that's listed in the book too. But, I thought I would spend a lot more time spinning my wheels on that one exercise than I did. And it was surprising because there's definitely stuff when you're sitting down and thinking about it hard that's going to resonate with you. Like, what are your passions? What are the things that are super important to you? What are non-negotiables? And these things are all your core values, right? Mm-hmm, but not having written them down for the plugins, I realized that I did myself a massive disservice all those years by just having these things in my head and thinking, oh, I know what the core values of the business are. That's bullshit. You don't. You only know when you write them down and then start to talk about them, because if you're not driving everything based on those core values, you've got nothing. You're just flying by the seat of your pants and winging it.
Yeah, and I think for us, the and I want to dig into kind of like how you laid out like those like 1-year plan and 3-year plan and rocks and stuff like that. But for us, the value in a lot of this stuff came from actually implementing it and talking about like quarterly goals with the teams and relaying those values to the team on a regular basis and talking about all this stuff as it relates to like our work. And we're just getting to the point where like people refer back to like quarterly goals when we're doing our regular work. And I think like for me, that's where like, okay, all this structure and value and like thought actually makes sense, because it answers a lot of the questions for you and for the team of like, what are we doing here? What are we trying to do? What does success look like? And it kind of codifies that if you're a solo founder for you, but if you're not, then it's an easy way for you to relay that to other people that you're working with.
Yeah. And so if you're not familiar with the Traction book, and by the way, I highly recommend this. If you're, I feel like I'm probably the last person on the planet that finally got to read this book. And it's possible that is not true, but if you are one of the, 3 other people that hasn't read this book, definitely get Traction by Gino Wickman. Also get his follow-up, Get a Grip, which is a fictional account of what this looks like in practice. But with that said, the EOS is going through this notion of how can you take a very long-term vision and then suddenly compress that down into a series of milestones that gets you to that longer-term vision, and then put it into a cycle where things are being constantly revisited and revised so that the goals that you're trying to look at and achieve are always the right goals at the right time. Would you say that's a fair characterization of that?
Yep.
Yeah. And so basically it started, and I found this kind of interesting, that the very first thing that you do, so after you do the core values, what are your core values? Then you have to figure out what your core focus is. So what is your niche and what is your purpose, cause, or passion? Then the very next thing that you do is, what is your 10-year target? And that 10-year target is supposed to be like this grand pie-in-the-sky vision. What do you really want to see out of this business in a decade? And it's only when you have that vision that you then start to say, all right, well, what does our market look like? How are we going to go after people in that market? What's unique about us that makes us the right fit for that market? And then you look at a 3-year picture. And then that 3-year picture is like, for me, I looked at it, all right, if it's a 3-year picture, then I should be about a third of the way to my 10-year goal. So what does that look like? And you write down all of the stuff on there. What's the date? What's the revenue, the profit, the measurables of things that you've accomplished by then, and what are the specifics? How many people are working for you? How many customers do you have? All of that sort of stuff. And then you then break that down further. So this is all, visionary stuff. And then you sort of transition into more tactical things. So then you go to the 1-year plan, which is, all right, now it's something that's a little closer, still not exactly right in front of you, but it's much closer than the 3-year plan. What does that look like? And again, it's the same stuff. What's your revenue? What's your profit? What's your measurables? And I took sort of a third of what that 3-year plan looked like and put that up there. And, was trying to say, all right, this is what I want to see in that time. And then you break that down even further by saying, all right, what am I going to do in the next 90 days to get me a quarter of the way to that year plan? And what are the things that are the most important to get me there? And then once you've identified that, and you're not supposed to put too many of those on the list, that's when you start focusing on, trying to make that stuff happen. And I think this is where, you and I have talked about this in our previous attempts at masterminds and all this sorts of stuff in the past about, all right, well, what are your annual goals? And then we said, no, we're setting like semi-monthly or semi-annually goals or quarterly goals. But I think without a bigger vision of where is it you want to get to, those goals are harder to achieve. They're harder to resonate. And I feel like they were always harder to act on.
Yeah, and I think that what like this exercise does is it kind of demystifies the end goal that you have. I want to build a business and sell it for $20 million or whatever, to like, all right, what do I need to do in the next 6 weeks or 12 weeks? Several steps down, that you've thought through, okay, if I do this quarter and then the next quarter and then the next quarter, that's my kind of next year. And then if I do that 3 more years, that's my 3-year. And then if I do that 3 more times, that's my 10-year, and that's the outcome. It just makes it tangible and kind of like somewhat achievable, Right. That's how I look at it.
And the nice thing about this is that, so I've done this year, and then next year I need to go through this whole exercise again. And that's sort of the weird part, I think, because you feel like, oh, you've done all this, now you're done, you just start executing to it. No, that's not true. The powerful part of it is to, you've gone through this exercise for a year of your rocks, and every 90 days you reset the rocks. Those are the goals for the quarter. And you try to get those things done. And then anything that you're having trouble with, you throw it onto this issues list. And this is where some of the stuff I think breaks down, because as a larger company, you have a lot of problems with communication. And not to say that as a small company, you don't have problems with communication, but the problems in a larger company are amplified considerably by silos, by politics, all kinds of crap. And this is where I think the part of traction kind of broke down for me, is that they talked about things like having level 10 meetings. I'm like,
with yourself.
Either I'm having a meeting with myself, or I have a very specific thing I want to talk about with my developer or a marketing person or whatever. And it's not going to be, this isn't going to be an hour-long thing. I don't need to do all of these ceremonial things around the meetings. If I had 5 people in the meeting, I can totally see the value of this. But for me, no. Doesn't make any sense.
Yep.
So,
and this is where we started this when we were 4 people maybe, and now we're 7 and we'll be 8 soon. And these are really important, and we're having more and more structure all the time around what is the purpose of that meeting? Because it's easy. I think it's easy for the weekly meeting to be an update meeting, and that is not what it is. It is not an update meeting, and I fall guilty to this, and people from our team listen to this show, and they all fall guilty to this too, and I try to ring us back in. And the point of these meetings, these weekly meetings, is to talk about our progress towards the quarterly goals, and basically, how am I doing towards that, and what is standing in the way, and am I on schedule? What do I need from the company or from another team? And as we're able to do more of that, those meetings become helpful. Where these meetings are not helpful is just hearing what everybody did last week, which I don't need to hear that. Everybody should be marching towards the same goal, and that's why we have these goals. And the meetings I think the goal of these meetings are to be highly productive in unblocking people and giving us the resources we need to be successful.
Right.
But
And
it's tough.
For developers, if you've been doing like the agile method, this is a scrum meeting, it's very much it's a very short summary. What am I working on? What am I going to work on today? What's blocking me? And it should take 60 seconds. If you're doing it right. And, it's true that like my current freelancing client, this tends to degenerate into a status report a lot of the time. And even when you tell people, tell me what's blocking you, they don't really understand what a block means. And so they will say no blockers. And then the next day you'll find out they made no progress. And you're like, oh, well, this one thing I was waiting for. It's like, wait, that's a blocker. Talk about the blockers. Like,
yeah.
There's definitely an art and a science to this, and it requires some discipline to be able, like, you got to be a good meeting leader to really call this stuff out and say, hey, you're just giving me a status update. I don't care about that. Is it on track? Great. Moving on. What are you doing now? What's your next thing? Just spare me the bullshit. Let's go straight to the meat of the problem here.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like after doing the exercise and like laying out the quarterly rocks and all this kind of stuff, like how do you see it affecting how you work going forward?
Well, I can tell you that I had to make some major changes at Recapture. So I've already put this in place, so I'm okay with talking about it. But I looked at what my plan was and where my growth is and what's going on right now, and I realized I needed to put some major changes in place. And what that meant was I got to let one of my developers go. I got to reduce the other developers' hours significantly, and I have to bring on a full-time marketing person, and we got to start working on some content marketing and some paid acquisition in a different way. And we got to do it like right now, because this is the downtime. And if I've got 3 months to prep, then in January, when the whole holiday season kind of lightens up and merchants are starting to look at solutions again, that's a perfect time to pop and start doing acquisition campaigns. So basically I'm like, all right, we got to lock and load now, and we got to work on this. So, it gave me great clarity, and it gave me the focus to say, all right, well, what do I need to do in order to grow? My goal was to double Recapture's MRR next year from where I'm at. And in order to do that, I have to put in significant growth, and I can't just, wait around for that to happen, which has kind of been what's been going on with the coronavirus stuff. I mean, that all just kind of fell in my lap, and that was great, and I got to passively act on that. But I need to be more proactive about that. And the only way I can really do that is with a marketing person who is engaged in specifically driving this piece of it. So, that made it very clear. My next 2 quarters at least of Rocks are all about marketing, growth, and acquisition. That's it.
I'm smiling over here saying, I seem to remember telling Dave or wondering about more marketing. So that's cool. I mean, the hard thing about marketing and the easy thing about product is like we all have a million things we want to build, and I think this is like a trap that everybody falls into, maybe even non-technical founders or founders that aren't coding like you, is like you just always want to build more stuff and think that more stuff will make the product sell better. And in some very rare cases, I think that like the product sells itself. But I think almost all of the time we need more marketing than we think we do, and that the product actually is, once it gets to a certain point, like once it's past this bar of like some degree of acceptable, then marketing really is like the key. Marketing is so hard to get your hands around if you don't have something that you think is working or that is working. If you have something that's working, then just keep doing that and do more of it. But like when you're just starting marketing, like to say, quote, I'm just going to do marketing is silly, and hard and disheartening. So That's
know
cool
what?
that you like realize that, but I think it's hard to put it into practice from here, you know?
It is. It is. And, here's what sort of drove me to that. And this is what was driving me into doing the retreat in the first place is that I had paid acquisition going on all summer, spring and summer. And it was just like, it was easy. It was cheap. And suddenly it was getting a lot less cheap.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, wait a minute, which made it, as soon as it got less cheap, like I couldn't just keep raising my budget infinitely. I was already spending a pretty significant amount on this. And suddenly it's like, it's not effective anymore. And I'm like, oh, crap. Because when I had all those cheap leads, things were working well. But suddenly my leads are getting more expensive and they're slowing down. It's like, oh, well, gosh, that's not going to work longer term. And I want to say that I let it go longer than I should have, but the truth is, it was working up to a point, and then I did some experiments, and then the experiments weren't working, and I really sort of realized after I ran the experiments long enough to feel confident about the results, which was, say, September, that I knew I had to change. And then at that same time, I got wind that a marketing guy from another respected e-commerce company, he popped free. He became a freelancer, and I'm like, holy shit. And, I saw that he was recommended on Twitter, and I jumped on it, and I contacted him, and I said, hey, man, I want to engage you. Like, what does this look like? Let's talk. And, on the plus side, he gave me a pretty significant plan that I know worked for a former competitor of mine. And that plan is looking pretty solid. And actually, because of the feature work that we did this summer on SMS marketing, I have a significant thing to launch come Q1 this next year. So had I not done that, I would have actually been in a more challenging place, because right now SMS marketing is kind of the hot thing. And everybody's starting to pick it up. Like all the big ones are picking it up now. Drip just started adding it. Klaviyo added it, and some others I've talked about it. So the fact that we have it now is significant, and so what I need to do is act on that. So that's where I was like, all right, perfect storm. I have a feature. I know I need marketing. My paid marketing's not working. I need somebody who's better. Let's pull this all together and make something happen out of that.
Are you able to share who this person is?
No, because they are not going to be. They're not going to be working with me long term on this. It turns out they got another job at another e-commerce company. So he's going to be helping me sort of structure the overall thing here and helping me find like a content person and a Facebook ads person, because he's got the connections. And to a certain extent, I think he's going to sort of like drive the strategy of it. But so I don't know if he's comfortable me sharing his name on here. So I'm not going to do that. I don't want to get him in trouble. But
Yeah.
I mean, he's certainly very knowledgeable about this, and his execution is like bang on. So
that's awesome.
I'm excited to have found him. I'm excited to get even the small brain share of his, because I think it's going to make a huge difference. Having somebody who knows what they're doing, has seen this before, has executed this kind of campaign, has seen significant success out of it. Like all of these things make me warm and fuzzy inside.
What do you think working with them will be like? Like, how will you work with a marketing person? Like, whether it's them or someone else down the road. Like, how involved will you be? How much are you kind of leaning on them or needing them to kind of ideate and execute? Or like, what do you think that looks like?
I think that there's going to be a pretty significant partnership in there. I know that I've talked to some other founders, and they were like driving the marketing all themselves, and all they really wanted was just somebody to execute to their plan. That's not totally me. And so I'm going to be looking for them to participate in the vision. And at the same time, I definitely am going to be having them execute to that. But obviously, I'm going to be, looking at this from a strategic perspective and say, is that really where I want to head the product? Is that the right does that resonate with the audience? Because I'm the one who knows my customers. I'm the one that knows what people are using and what they like. So that much, I guess I'm looking at it as maybe a 60-40 partnership, probably where they're about 60% and I'm 40%.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that the reason I ask, I think that's a tough thing when it comes to instilling your vision of what you think the company is and the brand and the product even, and who you think your customer should be, because you might be wrong, or there might be stuff that you haven't thought of. And I say that because it's definitely happened to me. And that balance of I know the customer the best, I should be the one to kind of drive that part of the vision. And like you're saying, handing off ownership of the outcome of these marketing efforts to someone else to let them really own the whole process, emotionally almost, is a tough balance. And I think it's something that has to be the trust has to be gained over time. The type of person you bring in and the way you work with them, like a full-time employee or a contractor, dictates some of that, I think.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's when I look at stuff like EOS, that's the next level that we're not there, but I think we're just starting to think about getting there, where it's not all my responsibility at some point, and
Right.
to say
It can't
okay,
be. You don't have enough. There's no way you have the bandwidth to do it all.
yeah. At some point I need
Nobody
to say,
does.
Jonathan, these are the 5 things we're getting done in this 6-week cycle. Call me if there's a fire. Otherwise, that's what we need to do. And we're definitely getting there on the product side. We're also very much getting there on the marketing side. But yeah, it's an effort. I think the biggest one is me not enabling the team to do that, because it's
Right.
a whole nother process. It's a whole nother process for me to do things to set them up to be successful by themselves. And yeah, I have to be able to do that. Otherwise I'd go crazy and burn out. But that's something that is, I think, something that I definitely am not there yet. When I talked to Kevin McCardle about EOS a year ago, he's totally there, because he has leaders in each division of the organization. And so he runs EOS with them, and I think they should run EOS with their teams, and however many layers you have, that's how it should go. And we are really flat organizations, and so we are the manager of each of those divisions. So in some respects, EOS is, I don't know, futile a little bit, but I think the goal for me is to talk the language and kind of work the process, even if I'm the one that's ultimately responsible for the outcomes in each business unit, so that the people that we have in place that are the leaders there can step into that place of ownership later on, because they've seen this process being run for so long.
Right.
But we're definitely not there. I mean, we're getting there, but it's a long journey.
Sure. Well, to answer your question about, how am I going to make sure that this gets managed? One reason I wanted to engage this guy is that he's done this for a former competitor already. So he already knows the space. He knows the customers. He knows which ones are most successful. So in a sense, we kind of get a shared brain on that. And if anything, maybe it's not even a shared brain. Maybe he's bringing stuff to the table that I'm simply not even aware of yet. They've gone a little higher into the market, and he probably has insights that I'm missing.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Because my customer perspective is slightly different than his customer perspective. So in that regard, I think I address that risk because of this guy's background. Now, with that said, and he can't be the one to drive everything about this, that now has turned into more of a risk than it was originally when I was starting out on this a couple of weeks ago. So that's definitely something I need to keep in mind in engaging this whole person and process, because the other people that I bring into this, I'm looking at Kaylee Moore as a person to do my content. She doesn't know that yet because I've received her contact information from this guy, but he has a warm contact with her and has worked with her in the past. And I am familiar with her work, and I know that other people have seen some really great stuff written by her. So, but like, for example, she really knows e-commerce. So would I be comfortable having her write about things for SMS marketing on this? Yes, I absolutely would. I'd have to hear what her perspective looks like on this. So, I mean, I'm engaging people that are knowledgeable in the space and are not new to this, where I have to literally spoon feed them everything about this. But yes, there are some things I'm going to have to be very aware of and mindful of here, especially the Facebook part. Because I've not run a successful campaign on Facebook's in over 6 years at this point. So I'm sure this is going to be a rocky ride.
They have to get your antacids ready for that first couple of weeks of just wasted money trying to figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it can't be any worse than what I'm throwing away in the Shopify App Store right now.
So. Yeah. I mean, the bringing people in that have like unique industry insights. Like we're seeing that with Matt Medeiros coming in, being a podcaster, having a lot of like WordPress experience. And it's been really cool to have somebody to speak with on many different levels or like about many different things that has as much experience as he has. And at the same time, like he would tell you that it's tough because we can't always agree. And like, so you basically have two people that should know what they're talking about, and one of them has to be wrong. And that's hard. But I think that you can make that healthy, but it still is kind of a thing.
Right. Yep.
Oh,
Don't hate Matt though. Matt's a good guy.
No, it's been wonderful, and I mean it really is like 1 + 1 = 3 in a lot of respects. But yeah, it's a learning curve to bring someone in who in a lot of ways is more senior than you, and like what is that like versus say you bring in a junior developer, like your relationship with them is very different. So what is like the immediate or like the near term outcome like in practice for this for you?
So I've got some content that needs to be written by the end of the year. I got 4 pieces on my list right now. Obviously, engaging the right marketing person and having a plan. Technically, those are done, so I put them on the rocks list anyway, just so I feel productive. I need to add some tracking stuff to the website. And the big thing right now is that my website it's in the code base of Recapture. And that's a problem. Anytime you want to do an update, especially if you want somebody who's not a developer to update it. Because I'm writing stuff in HTML. Let me tell you, this sucks. It sucks bad. So I am looking at pulling that piece of it out and putting it into a CMS. And I'll be honest, I'm not looking at WordPress at the moment either. I have a WordPress blog. I may keep that, but I'm seriously considering not a WordPress solution because our site is so blazing fast right now. Adding WordPress would be a detriment to it. Even in its most optimized form, I've never seen an optimized WordPress site that isn't like on WordPress.com with a massive CDN in front of it. Like it's never as fast as mine.
Yeah.
So, I don't want to lose that advantage because right now it's a pretty significant advantage. Google definitely prioritizes faster sites.
Yeah.
So there's that.
So, I mean, you could have like the homepage and the pricing page and the feature pages as like static and then have the blog as a subfolder or something like that, right?
Yeah, that's probably what I'm going to end up doing. I mean, what I really need is like the standard website stuff. So about us, pricing, and then like a features page or whatever. And then I need some landing pages for all the various campaigns because I have things that are going on right now, some affiliate landing pages, and I have some other landing pages that go on there for other various campaigns, podcasts, and stuff we've done. I need to keep all that stuff intact, and then I need the blog, but I don't need any of that into the source code. And right now, the blog is WordPress, so that's not a problem. In fact, if anything, moving my blog over will probably give me a boost because now it's on a subdomain. And I know moving to the main domain is always a boost. Always a boost.
Yeah. Yeah. What CMS are you looking at? Like, if you had to do it today, what would you do? Are you not willing to say that publicly?
Well, it's too early yet because I haven't. I mean, I just finished this last week saying I really need to do a CMS upgrade, and then it was like, am I going to do WordPress? I don't think so. I want to look at alternatives first. So,
Cool.
Static Kit, Jekyll, Ghost. I honestly don't know at this point. I really don't.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. You should talk to Brian Castle. I know that he, for Process Kit, started it on WordPress. Maybe no. So started it on Jekyll or one of those that integrates with Ruby, or is run on Ruby, and then recently moved it back to WordPress exactly for the same reason that you're talking about, so that he can have other people help contribute to it. Maybe it's just the blog. I don't know if it's the homepage or not, but yeah, I know that he was on Matt's podcast talking about going away from WordPress and then coming back because of accessibility from a team perspective.
Right.
Yeah, usability, I guess. Yeah, I mean, so our whole Castos.com, all the blog, all the podcast, homepage, feature page, pricing page, all is on WordPress. All is on a single WordPress site, and we're pretty happy with it. We're putting a new theme in place soon, which will speed it up quite a bit based on what we've tested. But yeah, I think the next step for us would probably be to take the homepage and the pricing page and the feature pages and make them static, and then have the blog and the podcast be WordPress. Because then that's, really then you're kind of like distributing your exposure too,
Yeah.
It's more shit that can break, but if somebody, no one's going to hack a static site. Well, I don't know. I'm sure they can, but it'd be very difficult to hack a static site.
Right.
So,
right.
Interesting.
Yeah. So interesting times ahead. And, I would say that's probably my riskiest rock of, despite the fact that all these other things are out there and that are going to require coordination. I think that's the hardest one because that's one I have to do. That's one I've got to be either directly involved with. I got to get the developer working on that or something, right? But I'm going to be a bottleneck in that, and that's what concerns me the most.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's super exciting to hear about the marketing push. I'm looking forward to hearing how that goes and comparing notes, and I mean everything from approaches to how that process is working with working with someone on the marketing front. Yeah, that'll be fun to talk about.
Yep. Cool.
And so, I mean, for folks out there who, are running EOS, both as solo founders all the way up to, teams of less than 10, would love to hear how you're doing it, what things you've run into, things that Dave and I aren't thinking about, because I'm sure there's many of them. Shoot us a message, podcast@roguestartups.com. And as always, if you're enjoying the show, please share it with someone who you think would enjoy it as well. Until next week.